Here's our crank. This is a factory non-forged 4.6 crank, what you would normally find in a GT. It's got a 6-bolt. Before we put our crank in, we're going to put a little Royal Purple Max Tough assembly lube in there. You can use other type of assembly lube, or you can just use oil if you're just going to fire it up right away. But it's probably better to use assembly lube. I just prefer this stuff, but other stuff will work. So smear it on here. Now before you put your crank in there, you want to send your crank and your pistons and your rods and bearings and stuff to get balanced. So this has all been balanced and measured, but you want to make sure it's clean. Even when you get back from the machine shop, you want to wipe it down real good with ATF. Blow out these oil passages here, or put a Q-tip or a pipe cleaner down in there and then blow them out just to make sure there's nothing on it. So make sure that your crank is clean before you put it in. So when you put this in, you want to watch out for the bearing surfaces and just kind of line it up and go straight down. You don't want to nick the bearing surface on the studs that are sticking up. So once you set it down, I don't like to spin it or anything like that. I like to leave it there and then start putting the main caps on. Now you can start putting your main caps on. Make sure that the number 1 is in the number 1 spot with the arrow pointing forward. Again, we're going to put some Max Tough Royal Purple lube on there. And just slide on in. Before we put our 5th main cap on, we got to put our thrust bearing in there on the top half. So it's going to slide around on there. That's got these little cutaways in there. That's to allow the oil to get to the friction surface. So the part that has the cutaways on it, one side is completely flat, one side has cutaways on it. The cutaway side is going to go towards the crankshaft, so this end towards the crankshaft. So here's your cutaways. Put some lube on there. And now with our cutaways this way, set it in, spin it down, and now number 5 cap can go on. The ARP kit's going to come with 3 sizes of nuts, so I keep them separate. These are the larger ones with the larger washers. These are the smaller ones with the smaller washers, and then these are the tiny ones, or a little bit smaller than these ones, and these are the ones that hold the windage tray on. So try to keep them separate. And I also like to wipe down at least the washers. You probably don't have to, but I like to wipe those down at least. Now I'm just going to put the large washers on the large studs. Now I'm going to take some of the ARP assembly lube that comes with the kits and put like kind of a large, maybe a pea size. I'm going to put it right in the corner of the washer. So here's where I put the ARP goop, just in the corner there. Push it up against the washer and the threads. And the reason why I do it that way is when you put this nut on there, as it tightens down, it pushes the ARP goo and it spreads it all the way around the bottom of the nut. And at the same time, it's going to be threading it onto the threads. We're going to do that with each one. Now I have a dab of goo on every one of the big studs. I'm going to go ahead and put the nut down on these. Get them just finger started. Now with my 12 mil 12 point, I'm going to run these down by hand. Just kind of snug them up. With a 1/2 inch ratchet, I like to slowly walk the main caps down. So I'll do like a couple of quarter turns on this one, a couple of quarter turns on this one, a couple of quarter turns until that main cap gets all the way seated. Then I'll move on, work my way from the inside out. Now all the main caps are snug down. Now we can rotate our crank around, make sure that it rotates freely. There's no binding in it. You can't move it up and down, wiggle it around or anything like that. And the reason why I don't like to move the crank until I get those main caps set is I don't want any chance of the bearing wanting to spin at all. So I tighten them down, snug them down first so that the tangs are touching each other, and that's what keeps them from spinning. Now we put the small washers on the small studs. And I do the same ARP. Now we'll put the smaller nuts on there. And with our 10 mil 12 point, run those all the way down. Sometimes when you put these in there, you can see that stud is about three threads low on there. I don't like to leave it like that, so what I usually do is I'll break this nut loose and then I'll back the stud out just a little bit so I have it more flush. There's a couple of them that I need to do it on this one and probably this one. There are 3 down in there. So any of the ones that if your stud is really far down in there, you can back it off a little bit so that you get more thread engagement on the nut. Now you can see the stud is more flush with the nut. Before we start doing our torque sequence to get our main caps torqued down, we need to push the crank forward. I like to rotate it around so the counterweight is up in this area, and then take a screwdriver and just kind of gently pry the crank forward and push the screwdriver down in there. It doesn't have to be super hard in there, and then leave it so that you can still get the torque wrench on these ones. And what that does, it helps set the thrust washer, and it can also help with the other main caps as well to seat them in there. But yeah, you just want to pry the crank forward. Okay, ARP's recommended torque for these is 25 on the little ones and 60 on the big ones. And basically the torque pattern is going to go, you start with the outside, the small ones, and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then you do the inside ones in the same pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that pattern, but I'm going to start with the outside, the small ones, and I set my torque wrench to 20, and I don't want to go beyond that. I may just go through and just kind of snug them up. Then I'm going to do the same for the bigger ones. You can check and make sure that you still got your pressure going forward on your crank. And now I'm going to go through and torque them to 20, starting with the outside ones. Now the inside ones to 20. Now you take your screwdriver out. And now I'm going to go to 25 on the outside in the same pattern. And now do the inside ones up to 40. So now I'm going to take these up to 40. And now the last torque sequence is going to be 60 on the big ones. Now that everything's torqued and tightened down, you can spin it, make sure it still spins freely. Now we'll move on to the side bolts. So the Nemaks don't have the jack screws on the inside, but ARP makes 2 sets of these for the Texid and for the Nemak. 156502 is the one they say is for the later models, but 156501 is the one that works in the Texans. I took one of these out and I compared it to the 156501, and I don't see any difference between 156501 and 5002. So we're going to use these ones, and I'll show you how I prep them. I got all the side bolts laid out, and I like to take a little bit of RTV, again like a little pea size, and then put it along the inside of the bolt face. Just a thin little coat. Put a thin little coat on there. I've seen these leak without it. I put them together without it, and I've had one or two of them get a slight seep going in them. Okay, these are all 10 mil now that I've ran them all down by hand. You use the same torque sequence that you used on the main caps. It's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9 and 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my torque wrench to 20 and then just kind of snug them down. ARP recommends for the M8 go to 30 pounds and for the M9 go to 45 pounds. I measured the thickness of these. They're M9, so we're going to go to 45 pounds total. We already got them hand tight. Now I've got my torque wrench set to 25. I'm going to do that same bolt pattern. And now finally 45 on all of them in the same bolt pattern. Okay, now I'm going to set up to check the end play. This is the same base plate and dial gauge that's used in the trick flow kit that I used in previous videos to set up the cam timing and to degree cams. So you should be able to move the crank forward and backward, and it'll just be like a slight little clunk. And so we're going to pry it all the way one direction. And zero out the gauge, and then pry it the opposite direction. And we got 6 thousandths. And you want between 5 and 10 thousandths, somewhere in there. You know, it doesn't need to be too tight, doesn't need to be too loose, but on a new engine, it's generally going to be around 5 thousandths. We got 6 thousandths, so the end play on this one is good. So now our crank is installed. All the ARP fasteners are torqued down. Last thing you can do is give it a good spin, just to make sure it spins around freely. Should be nice and smooth. Should take very little effort.